Greetings, adventurers. My name is Kramer, and welcome back to the kitchen for another episode of Cooking Anachronism. Today, we are making a recipe all the way from the Inns of Skyrim, Chicken Dumplings. This is coming to you from the official Elder Scrolls cookbook, the link for which can be found in the description, along with the ingredients list from the book, but I today will be using a lot of substitutions for the ingredients. The book says, "These dumplings are a specialty of many an inn across Skyrim where travelers can enjoy them hot after a long day's journey, but they are also a popular pick in one's own homestead kitchen. In either case, the creamy filling has restorative properties, especially washed down with a flagon of the local specialty." So this recipe isn't necessarily complicated, but it is a bit longer in terms of how much prep needs to be done. We are going to be working with 2 cups of cooked chicken. So you can either cook that from raw to begin with, or you can get a roasted chicken, but the recipe does call for around 6 drumsticks worth. That is what it is quantifying as 2 cups of cooked chicken. So our chicken was already pre-cooked. We cooked it the night before. So the next step is to create the rest of the filling. The recipe calls for leeks. We're going to be using an onion today, as well as a medium-sized carrot and some garlic. Onions are going to go in first. If you're doing the recipe from the book, it is going to call for a leek instead. We're using onions. So the onions are going to turn translucent. They're going to get a little tender. We're not browning them though. And then goes in the garlic and the diced carrot. After all the vegetables cook, we're going to be adding some Stormcloak seasoning, a tablespoon of all-purpose flour, and we're going to stir that in order to make sure that the flour is fully incorporated, as the cooks like to say. Then comes 3/4 of a cup of cream. Now I added mine a little too quickly, so I think my mixture ended up a little less liquidy than it was intended to. Mine turned out a little dry. Salt and pepper to taste. After all of that is fully incorporated, what we're going to do is take it off of the heat and add 1/4 of a cup of grated cheddar cheese and let that melt in, mix that up, and then we're going to add the meat. Now, my pieces of meat here, we didn't really break them down enough. I think they were a little too big. It led to some problems later down the road. So just make sure that you were either tearing up or cutting the chicken into more bite-sized pieces than I have here, but then we're going to mix everything together and let that stand. Next, we need to go ahead and grab our pie dough. You can be using pie dough that you just purchased at the grocery store, or you can make pie dough yourself. That is what we did. We used the rye pie dough recipe, but that will be in a separate video. Now, what we want to do is we want to take the pie dough, roll it out to 1/8 of an inch thickness, and then cut it into squares, and those are going to be our dumplings. Ye old medieval Tupperware. This is a technique that has been passed down through the generations for creating perfect squares in pie dough. Perfect. The Tupperware trick worked great for actually cutting out the squares, but when I do this again, I will be just using a knife because the rounded corners actually made it very difficult to seal the dumplings up properly. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that filling and portion it out into each one of these squares. The recipe says to leave about 1/2 of an inch on each edge of the square in order to leave enough room for the dumpling to close. We had that about, but we still ended up with some tearing, and I think that's because the rounded corners of the square weren't quite reaching all the way to the center like they needed to. Before we fold the dumpling, we're going to wet each one of those edges with a little bit of water. And then we're going to take 1 corner from each end, fold those into the center, mush them together so they seal, and then take the corners from the other 2 ends and fold those together as well. And this will form 4 seams that we can then seal together. And you could do a nice crimp or something like that if you wanted to. We just sealed them like that. final step is to baste them with a little bit of egg wash, and then we're going to put them in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for around 30 minutes. So here they are. We've let them cool down a little bit, and I've pre-cut a slice here. Okay, I should have seasoned them a little bit more. I think I could have added even more cream. I wish it was a little bit more gravy-like, because it's almost a little dry, but everything's cooked through. The carrots are very, very tender. The pie dough really is the standout for me right now. I've never had rye pie dough before, and it really does make a difference. It's also a little less flaky. I don't know if that's because of the flour or because I over-kneaded the pie dough itself, but it's got a crunch to it, but it's not as flaky. I don't know what it's supposed to be like. So I realized one of my mistakes when I sat down to eat this, because this is actually my dinner, was trying to cut it into small pieces and then eat it with like a knife and a fork. This really is a pick it up and just bite into it sort of food. You get a lot more flavor, you get a lot more moisture in it that way. The bites with the onion are the most enjoyable to me because they have retained most of their moisture. I really think that I should have added more cream. The chicken really needed to cook in more fat in order to keep it nice and juicy. That's where a lot of the dryness is coming from, and I should have seasoned it better. But this is a really nice standard sort of fare. I'm struggling to think of anything new to say about it because it's just a chicken dumpling. It's comforting, it's a good food, but it's not breaking any new barriers. But it is easy and really, really delicious. So a nice little recipe, a little bit more complicated, but still very simple with the amount of ingredients that we're using. Something that you can make and take with you because it's self-contained if you're going on an adventure, or something that I could definitely see being served in a plate of two at your local tavern. Would be really nice with a nice dark beer. But it does raise an interesting question, which is, what do you do with the leftover pie dough? And we've got a little interesting recipe for you coming up next week with a way that you can recycle that old pie dough, because there's always that little leftover bit. So see you next Wednesday. And in the meantime, I'd like to wish you good luck on your adventures.